where we know that we're entering into a new world. There's still a lot of rules about the old world that still are applicable. And the question is that I think we all want to know is just how stressed are our markets? I mean, people are, this is the end of the world or what? So why don't we go through and look at what I think are some of the key points for you to make up your own mind on what's going on. So the first thing that everyone's focused on is that this correlation between the dollar and the Treasury yield seems to have broken down. For the last 5 to 7, 8 years, when our yields go up, the dollar goes up. When our yields go down, the dollar goes down. So this has been changed since Liberation Day. So now the yields on our 10-year have gone from 416 to 442, while the dollar's dropped 4.7% against a basket of currencies, and against the main currencies, we're down almost 9%, all right? And here's a chart that indicates this. Now, the paragraph below it says all this other stuff. I'm going to call this noise, the tax bill, the U.S. credit rating, and the sustainability of our deficits. At this time, I don't see that as an issue. So an analyst at Apollo, he says that our credit default spreads have gone up, which indicates some stress, and he says they are trading at levels similar to Greece and Italy. So here's the chart of our default since 2008. These are our CDSs. And here's the Italian. It seems to me that our gentleman from Apollo was doing some clickbait, because I don't see this as an issue at all. And in fact, when you look at the notional value of our CDSs, you can see that we didn't even hit 2011 or 2013 when we had issues, and that our CDSs went up. So I went back and I said, so what are we equivalent to, right? We seem to be just about the same. And here's actually the volume of the CDSs, and you can see for the last, since 2024, it's really not much difference. So in 2011, believe it or not, we had a standoff over the debt, and we had S&P downgrade our debt. So, history rhymes. In 2013, again, it was us messing around where the Republicans would not, pass the debt ceiling. So it would seem on the face of it, the CDSs are not showing us that we're stressed, that people think we're going to not pay our debt. And fact is, I saw someone who say that the price of the CDS is pricing in that there's a 1% chance of a default to the U.S. debt. So I don't see that happening, all right? Now, what I do think is something that we have to monitor. I'm not saying that this is indicating the end of the world, because I don't believe that. But when you look at this, you sit there and you say, and you can notice everyone's talking, and we did this in yesterday's video, about the long bonds of all the sovereign nations. They're all going up. So I don't know if people are worried about this relationship as much as this one. And here's the rise in 30-year government bonds around the world since Liberation Day. So you can see this is something I think all the governments are worried about, so we should be worrying about it also. But for Americans, the US dollar share of SWIFT transactions for the first time has just crossed 50%. We were usually around 49.8, something like that. Now we're at 50%, over 50%. So again, I caution people, you have the dollar, which all our transactions are done in. It's not going away. On the other hand, you have the treasuries, which is the issue that we're all going to have to deal with. So here's the top 8 currencies in the world, right? And so if you want to know why it's hard to leave the dollar, you just have to look at this. So you can see, they have them at 49.1%. It's now over 50%. So I believe it still leaves us with the two things that we want to watch. We want to watch the dollar, okay? And two, we want to watch the 30-year Treasury bond. I know the 10-year, I always pull it up first, okay, because that's the one people use in the financial world. But in this case, given where we are in the economy, in the global economy, with the tariffs coming to everybody, all the governments, Federal Reserve, central bank, control the short end. It's the long end. And we saw that yesterday. Everyone's saying we're not going to issue as much on the long end and hopefully bring out the short end so we don't drive up the yields on the long end. So what are we watching? So here's the dollar index going back, I think, whatever it is, 1987 or something like that. But notice, for 2008, we started the great financial crisis in 2007, and the dollar declined. And the reason it declined, even though people were buying our treasuries, the dollar declined because every country in the world, every company in the world had to sell their debt or their dollars to bring it home to pay off their debts, okay? And in fact, during the crisis, the Federal Reserve did a reverse repo with Europe for $600 billion because the European banks needed dollars to pay off their debts, and they couldn't print the dollars in Europe, so we actually the government literally did a repo with the ECB to give $600 billion. That's why the dollar went down there. And here's our 30-year bond. So we're right here. It's interesting to note that the 30-year yield is, last time we were here was in August of 2007. That's where we were when the last time we were at this yield. So first, I would say it's obvious that the dollar is still the reserve currency of the world and the preferred currency for doing trading, okay? So that's to our advantage. Second, we know that all the sovereign countries are having issues with the bonds because, one, all our countries are heavily in debt, and all of us, if we're going to goose our economy because of all the tariffs coming, and these tariffs, we did a video on this, are now, right now, are equivalent with Hartley-Smoot, and which gave us the Great Depression, and I would say in the next couple of weeks, they're going to supersede that. So they are real tariffs. Do not dismiss these tariffs. They are real, all right? And they are going to have an economic effect. So what the world is looking at and planning for is that these sovereign nations, when they get tariffed, they are going to issue debt so that they can goose their economies and drive the economies, because the economies are going to be slowed because of the tariffs. And then you got the currency. We're out there negotiating with all these countries saying, we want you to raise your currency, which would mean to raise your interest rates. But if you're raising your interest rates, the currency goes up, you're crushing your economy, the tariffs are crushing the economy. What do? What's the choice? So I believe that, one, as I've said since the very beginning, since Liberation Day, the biggest risk to America today is not if people sell our treasuries. We can do QE and buy them up, okay? Doesn't matter, all right? What matters is if they do not buy our treasuries. Because if they don't buy our treasuries, then the dollar's going to go down and our treasury yields are going to go up. And we're going to have inflation, and then we're into this circle that we just can't get out. So, what do you think? Tell me in the comments, and like and follow.